In my last video, I talked about 5 myths that I no longer believe about the United States after living abroad for many years. So I wanted to talk about 5 myths that I no longer believe about China after living in China for 14 years. So there are a lot of things that Americans believe about China that are just wrong. And so I want to talk about 5 of them because I think it's interesting, and I think it's extra interesting because I lived there for 14 years. So I have firsthand knowledge and I have a lot of experience from my time living in China. So let's start with one that's very easy and that I would get often when I went home, and that is about food. So pretty much forever, there's this myth that Chinese people eat cats and dogs. And whenever I'd go home to the United States, people would always ask, "Oh, did you ever eat dog? Did you ever, eat a dog or a cat? Oh, it seems so crazy." And I would always laugh and say, "No, it's not really something that is common there." Now, if you go online, you can find examples of festivals where they eat dogs. And just like any festival, it happens like once a year, and it's not common. So, does the average Chinese person eat dogs or cats or any other pets? No, it's not common at all. This is one of those myths that a lot of people have pushed. So, is it common today? No. As a matter of fact, China is the second largest pet market in the world. They love their cats and dogs, and they treat them like Americans treat their pets. They buy clothes, they buy all kinds of toys and food and everything that you can get in the pet care market, they buy. There's veterinarian shops in a big city, there's veterinarian shops on every corner. Maybe not every corner, but there's plenty of veterinarian shops, and they treat cats and dogs like pets, no different than in the United States. So that is a big myth that a lot of people will have, and a simple one that we can get out of the way, because again, it's one of those ones that people would always ask me whenever I went home. "Hey, did you ever eat dog?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't. Not to my knowledge." Is there mystery meat in China? Sure. There was some, street vendors that I ate meat, and they said it was chicken or beef or lamb, but it could have been anything. But in reality, they aren't eating it. It's not on the menu. It's not something that you would order when you went to a restaurant. Unless you're going to a very, very specific restaurant looking to buy that. So that's the first myth to get out of the way. The second one is that China is a communist nation. This is a little bit more in depth, and it's a nuanced topic. On the surface, they are communists, and that is their goal. They're a socialist state, and just like with any socialist state trying to reach, the end goal of communism, they will say that on the surface. But in reality, they are very capitalistic, and its economy is capitalistic, and its government is socialist slash communist, with the goal of trying to better the people's lives. So it's extremely complicated, but it's one of these myths that China is this communist state that is completely oppressive. And that's just not what I experienced there. And talking to people that live there, coworkers and other people, they didn't experience it that way either. Is it, do they have a communist party? Yes. Do many people join the communist party in order to get ahead in business? Yes. But there's also free markets, and people are allowed to buy and sell goods as they please. It's very capitalistic in the everyday interactions. There's no communist oversight in a very oppressive way that it's often portrayed in the Western media. The next one is workers' right and government oppression. So because the United States and many Western media portray China as this communist dystopia, they often talk about human rights, workers' rights, and government oppression. And this, again, is a myth about China. China is not oppressing its people. There might be a subset or a few areas in which they are more aggressive or extreme. That could be Tibet. That could be Xinjiang, but it's not to the level that the United States portrays it, and it's not slavery, and it's not taking away everybody's rights. Workers do have rights in China. There's not sweatshops on every corner. Workers, especially if you've been out of business for a long time. I even talked about this in a previous video where I said my views had changed on China after living there for some time, and you can watch that video after this one. But workers do have rights. I remember it was difficult to fire people after a certain amount of time of working for a company. And I believe it was after 3 years. I'd have to look it up. But I believe it was after 3 years they're given kind of like a permanent contract, especially for the companies that I was working for. And after that, it was very difficult to fire an employee because they basically had a long-term contract, and you could move them around. You could make their life miserable, essentially, to try and get them to quit, but you couldn't just outright fire them if they were performing their job and doing, what they were asked. Also, when it came to like women's rights when they were giving birth, so like mothers' rights, they were giving a lot of maternity leave, and basically once a woman was pregnant, it was almost impossible to fire that woman, especially for the time that she was pregnant, and then for like a year or two after she had her baby, it would be almost impossible to get rid of her. So much so that people would, in the interview process, ask, "Are you married? Are you planning on having a baby? Or are you pregnant?" Which is very invasive, but they would not hire women if they were planning on having a baby or if they were currently pregnant. And they really wanted to hire single women when it came to hiring women, because there's a less likely chance of her getting pregnant because of the way the workers' rights, especially for women, is set up. So this idea that there's like forced labor and people are being oppressed in their work really isn't true. Is there forced labor? Well, yeah. I mean, there's prison work. If you've committed crimes, then yeah, there's that type of forced labor. But that's also in the United States. That's in most countries, that if you've committed a crime and you've lost your rights, then you might be forced to work. But that's no different than any other country. So that's one big myth that people often have about China, is that there are no workers' rights and that everybody's being oppressed, which is just not true. And following that, because they have this idea that China is a communist country with no rights, people often think that China is poor. And this is not true either. This is a misconception or a myth that is still pushed out into the kind of mainstream media, is that China is a poor country. And it's not anymore. It definitely was. But if you go to any of their major cities now, you go to Shanghai, you go to Shenzhen, you go to Beijing, you go to Chongqing or Chengdu, they have the most modern cities in the world. I would say probably in the world. Only other countries that might be rivaling their cities would be like Saudi Arabia or Dubai, places like that. So China is at the forefront of development, and they have really built out their cities. Now, if you go into the countryside, you'll see poor people. You'll see people that have less. But that's in anything. You go into the countryside of any country, India, China, United States, even here in Portugal, we go drive through some of these smaller towns and you see that the poverty level is higher. That is normal. So this idea that China is a poor country just doesn't really hold up anymore. In terms of GDP, it's the second largest in the world when you look at the raw numbers of GDP. If you look at purchasing power parity, PPP, China is number one in terms of purchasing power. So depending on how you look at it, it is the richest country in the world, or the second richest if you look at straight dollar terms. So to think that China is this poor, backwards country is a big myth, and one that I think people, when they do travel to China and start traveling and seeing the cities and the trains in the subway systems and how advanced they are in terms of mobile payments and other things like, 3D advertisement and stuff like that. People are really blown away because they think that China is a poor nation, and it really isn't, especially in the big cities. There's money, and they're investing that money in the cities. And then the final one, kind of going back to this whole idea of oppression, which is a big one that the United States and Western media always pushes, is about human rights and about kind of oppression and slavery and stuff like that. And so this one, the myth is that there is no religion in China, or that you're not allowed to practice religion in China. And this is a myth. You are allowed to practice religion in China. You just have to register it with the government. You just have to let the government know who you are, what religion you're practicing, and, if your memberships are growing or shrinking, or who's coming to your services. And there are quite a few religions. There's Islam, there's Christianity, there is Buddhism, there is Taoism, and then there's a lot of spirituality in the sense of, even though there might not be a specific church or temple or mosque or something, people do believe in spirituality, and people do believe in spirits and gods, and it is not completely outlawed. You can have services. There was a church in Beijing. I never went to it because I didn't need to. But there was a church in Beijing. Actually, I think there's a couple churches in Beijing, and there was a couple of mosques. So the idea that China is a godless place is not real. It's not a real thing. It's a myth, because you can practice religion, and it is allowed as long as you are reporting what you're doing in your congregation. What China doesn't like is any organization, doesn't matter if it's a business or a religion or, your local YMCA. What they don't want is large groups of people gathering and pushing ideas against the state, or could be used to push ideas against the state. So as long as you're reporting who you are, you're allowed to practice religion in China. And there's a lot of people that do it privately too, meaning they don't actually join a church or a mosque or some kind of temple. They just practice religion at home, in the privacy of their home. And there's plenty of people who believe in some sort of deity or some sort of god in China. It's just not pushed in the way that it is in other countries. Again, because the state wants you to focus on the state and not on higher powers. So those are 5 myths that are not true, that a lot of people believe. People believe that they eat dogs. People believe that it's a communist wasteland with no workers' rights, and in that it's poor and backwards, and that there's no religion. In my experience living there for 14 years, that is not what I saw. I saw a vibrant country that was developing at a faster pace than any other country I've ever been to, that had a lot of capitalism, had a lot of workers' rights, ate a wide variety of food, and really cared about their pets, and that some of them did practice religion, just maybe not so openly as you would have in a Muslim country or Christian country. So there you are, 5 myths that are not true that people believe about China, and that I no longer believe about China after living there for so long. What are some of the ones that I missed? Give me some of the ones that you think are important and should be dispelled, that these myths should be dispelled about China, in the comments below, because I find it very interesting to read your comments, and many of you think differently than me, and many of you who live there might have thought of some other ones that I just didn't think of right now. So leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.